Today, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful prayers in the entire New Testament from the Apostle Paul. But what's really fascinating here is who he's praying for. He's writing to this church in Ephesus that was, by all accounts, already knocking out of the park. I mean, they were faithful, they were loving. So why in the world does Paul pray for them like they're starting from scratch? Let's break it down.
Right. This is the central puzzle of the whole thing. Paul says he's heard these glowing reports about their faith and their love for all the saints. He even calls them the faithful ones. And yet his prayer isn't just hey, keep up the good work, guys. Not at all. It is this incredibly profound plea for something more. It's a prayer for people who seem to have it all to actually receive everything. So what's going on here? Okay, so to really get the prayer, first we have to get what Paul heard about them. The very first thing he brings up is their faith. Now, in the source material for this, Dr. Darko highlights that when the New Testament uses the word faith, it means something way deeper than how we often use it today. It's not just an idea you agree with, it's an action you take.
So, New Testament faith really has two parts, and you can't have one without the other. The first part is kind of what we'd expect, intellectual assent. That's just agreeing that, yep, this statement is factually true. But the second part, that's the game changer, committed trust. This is where you take that belief and you stake your entire life on it. No reservations.
Dr. Darko gives this amazing analogy to show the difference. Imagine a magician cuts the head off a cow and then, poof, brings it back to life. The whole crowd now believes the magician can defeat death. That's part one, intellectual assent. But then the magician asks for a human volunteer, the person who actually steps forward, offering their own neck. Now that is the one with true faith. See the difference? They don't just believe, they trust. And this is the kind of deep, all-in faith the Ephesians were known for. So, knowing this church has that kind of deep, committed faith, what does Paul pray for? Well, he doesn't ask for their protection, or for them to get rich, or for their health. He prays for something completely internal. He prays for a fundamental shift in how they see reality. He literally prays for a new kind of sight. And he uses this unforgettable phrase. He prays that the eyes of your heart might be enlightened. It's a strange image, right? Kind of weird, eyes plural on your heart singular. But in the biblical world, the heart wasn't just about feelings. It was the absolute center of your entire being, your intellect, your emotions, your will, your moral compass. Paul is praying for that very core of who they are to be just flooded with light. This prayer basically breaks down into two key requests. First is for illumination, that God would give them a spirit of wisdom and revelation. It's like he's asking God to flip on the lights. And the second is for knowledge. Okay, once those lights are on, what does he want them to see? He wants them to truly, deeply know three specific life-altering truths. And here they are, the three things Paul is desperate for them to get in their bones. First, the hope of their calling. And this isn't some vague wishful thinking. It's a rock-solid certainty about the future that changes everything now. Second, the incredible riches of the inheritance God has for them, to understand the massive spiritual wealth they have access to. And third, and this is the big one, the sheer, mind-blowing, immeasurable greatness of God's power. Yeah, it's this third point that is absolutely the climax of this whole prayer. When Paul talks about God's power, he is not messing around with vague generalities. He's talking about the power that literally underpins all of reality, the ultimate power source.
I mean, just listen to the language here. It's staggering. He doesn't just say great power. It's the immeasurable greatness of his power. And notice the direction. It's not just a power that exists out there somewhere in the universe. It's a power directed toward us who believe. It's personal. It's accessible.
But, immeasurable power can still sound a little abstract, a little floaty. And Paul knows this, so he doesn't leave it there. He gives this power a concrete, historical benchmark. He points to one single event as the ultimate demonstration of what this power actually looks like when it's put to work. And this is the benchmark. It is the very same power that reached into death itself and pulled Christ back to life. The same power that then lifted him up to the highest place of authority you can imagine, the right hand of God. And the same power that placed him far, far above every conceivable spiritual or political authority, not just in our world, but in any world to come. And right here, this is where the prayer lands with just incredible force. Why did Paul desperately want this already faithful church to understand the power that resurrected Jesus? Because it wasn't just a one-time thing. That exact same power is meant to be the operating system for a believer's life. Paul draws this stunning parallel that connects everything. Look at it this way.
Christ was physically dead in a tomb. Well, Paul says the believer was spiritually dead in sin. Christ was raised to new life by God's immeasurable power. And guess what? The believer is made alive by that very same power. Christ is seated in the heavenly realms. The believer is seated with Christ in those same places. The power that worked in him is the exact same power at work in us. And this brings us right back to that original puzzle. Why pray so intensely for a church that's already faithful? Because Paul's prayer shows that even the most committed people can live their lives without really grasping the reality of the power that's available to them. His whole prayer was that they would know this deep in the eyes of their heart. And so it leaves us with the same challenge today. What would it actually look like to live as if that were true?